So if you have a hip hike, that means that one of your hips is sitting higher than the other. In my case, my right hip is sitting higher than my left hip. And at the same time, my right shoulder is also lower. So this creates a lot of compression on the right side. So for someone in a situation like mine, the focus is on actually breathing into that right side, relaxing it, lengthening it by contracting the opposite side. And this is something that's already done in lateral movements. So an example of that is the standing half moon pose. If we do it properly, we contract and shorten one side while breathing into the other. Another example of this is extended side angle pose, where we take a long stance about 4 to 5 feet apart, and we consciously contract the lower side of the torso while breathing into the other side. And so what happens when you do an asymmetrical pose like that with your imbalanced side? So my right side, which is already shortened, is getting further shortened, but then invite a contraction on the side that's lengthening as well. When most people twist, they actually shorten the side they're twisting into like this. And if your back foot is angled out about 90 degrees, like mine is here, that's going to really further shorten your right side. So what we do is this exercise where we focus on letting the hips move with us. I learned this from Richard Freeman, and he calls it ninja hips. So you imagine that you're in a kung fu class. In other words, come into a short warrior 2, where the pelvis is facing the side of the mat. And then as you exhale, imagine you're breaking through a wooden block with your back hand. Wow. But we're actually using the arm to guide the leg. So the back leg rotates in, and the front hip rotates out. And that outward rotation of the front hip is key. What's happening in a hip hike a lot of the time is that front hip is actually rotating in and hiking up. So instead, we're letting the other leg rotate in and hike up. And this creates more space in the joint. So this applies to how you do something simple like Warrior 1. It also applies to forward folds like Parshvottanasana, runner's stretch, where the hands are behind the back. Instead of just folding over like that, which is okay to do, but it does tend to hike up the hip, we use our ninja hip technique, where we draw back through the hip joint of the front leg, letting the back leg turn in, and consciously hiking up that back hip, which creates engagement around the abdominals, as well as around some of the lower back muscles. And so we keep that little bit of twist as we fold. You'll notice that my left shoulder here is actually lower than my right shoulder, which is part of this pattern that lets me create space through the right side body, which is usually compressed. Say if your right foot's forward and you're twisting to the right, the way you do it properly is introduce a lateral movement, contracting the left side of your body while lengthening up through the right side. So for the hip that's hiked up, this can actually be a very good way to do it. But the other exercise we can do is called the Boring Warrior 3, where we use the same ninja hip technique, and I'm going to roll my shoulders up and back and to consciously contract the front of the thigh, the quadricep muscles. So this allows me to connect to the muscles that also support the arch of the foot. And I'm trying to balance the weight on the heel and the ball of the foot while relaxing the toes. So this is the hard part, is pushing off the back toes to bring the pelvis forward a little bit past the ankle. And just hanging out there, we're trying to still work the way through the ball of the foot and the heel while softening any gripping of the toes. Next phase is lifting the back leg, so we really have to focus on keeping those quads toned. And I'm trying to keep my leg completely straight so I can train the smaller glute muscles to support the hip joint. And what happens with many people is that they'll either end up bending the knee and collapsing into the midline, which is the inward rotation, or they'll end up pressing the knee kind of out, which is outward rotation. We're trying to work with a strong neutral position. And that's the same way we're going to be using our legs in other postures. You can start adding intensity to it by drawing back through the right hip, spreading the arms like wings, and then the more the torso tips forward, the higher you lift the back leg. So this variation is quite challenging for most people. We're pushing the way through the heel and the ball of the foot. Even more challenging is reaching forward like Warrior 3. And then taking the hands to the floor past the foot, we have another version of Warrior 3, where the hands take a little bit of weight and we lift the heart in the back leg. But instead of lifting the back leg as high as possible, we're working that inward rotation pattern in that leg, so the standing leg can stay neutral, drawing back through the hip joint. So this is a pattern that we're working through pretty much all of our postures. So let's also look at how this applies to seated forward folds. This posture is called head to knee pose, in Sanskrit Janu Shirshasana. So the name of the pose implies bowing your head to your knee. But the way a lot of people do it is with the abdomen kind of relaxed because of that instruction of breathing into your belly, which isn't a bad instruction, but there's other layers of technique we can add to it. Cue the ninja hips. Whoa! So remember, we're using the arm to train the leg, so that left arm presses forward and it tells the left leg to turn inwards. That's right, this leg is turning inwards as we fold. And what that's doing is it's training this leg, my straighter leg, to turn outwards, creating more space in the hip joint. And then if I choose to lift the heart, that's great. I could also fold forward and still be in a good position. Because instead of hiking the hip, which can wear down the tissues around the joint, we're training the glutes to do some work, turning the hip out. My name is Mike Dinney from Core Teachings Yoga. Thank you very much for tuning in today, and I hope you have a long, thriving practice. Peace. Namaste.